The first bullet whistled past Nathaniel McAllister's ear, close enough that he felt the air disturb his graying hair. The second tore through the sleeve of his weathered duster, grazing skin, but drawing no blood. He didn't flinch at either. Instead, he counted. 1, 2. By the time he heard the third shot, Nate had already pivoted behind an outcropping of rock, the motion as fluid as water finding its course downhill. His Winchester was already pressed against his shoulder, eye aligned with the sight. He didn't rush. He never rushed. That's what had kept him alive through the war between the states and for the hard years that followed. The shooter was perched on a ridge 50 yards distant, partially concealed by scrub brush. Amateur mistake. The vegetation moved with each breath the man took, giving away his position. Nate inhaled deeply, held it, then released half his breath. His fingers squeezed. The distant figure jerked, then slumped. One down. Movement to his left caught Nate's eye, the second pursuer charging with more courage than sense. Nate worked the lever on his rifle, chambered another round, and swung the barrel toward the approaching threat. The man was close enough now that Nate could see the stubble on his chin, the grimy bandana around his neck, and the wild desperation in his eyes. Nate's second shot hit the man square in the chest. He staggered 3 more steps through sheer momentum before collapsing face first into the dust. Silence settled across the Texas landscape, broken only by the call of a distant hawk and Nate's own measured breathing. He waited, counting to 60, then to 60 again. Only when certain no other threats remained did he step out from his cover. Pain lanced through his left shoulder as the adrenaline began to fade. Looking down, he noticed a dark stain spreading across his shirt. The second bullet had done more damage than he'd initially thought. Nothing immediately fatal, but it would need tending. He approached the nearest body cautiously. Rifle still ready, the man was face down, blood pooling beneath him, staining the thirsty earth. Using his boot, Nate turned him over, studying the features for recognition. Just another hard-faced drifter, likely hired for a one-time job, killing Nathaniel McAllister. It wasn't the first time someone had tried. Nate knelt, wincing at the pain in his shoulder, and searched the man's pockets. A few dollars of cheap pocket watch ammunition, and Nate's hand froze as he pulled a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket of the dead man's vest. The paper was thick quality stock and sealed with wax that had been broken. What caught Nate's attention, however, was the name written on the outside in elegant script, Nathaniel McAllister. A letter addressed to him, carried by a man sent to kill him. Nate stood backing away from the body, eyes fixed on the letter. The sun beat down mercilessly as he broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was painfully familiar, though shakier than he remembered. Nate, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I bought this ranch 5 years ago with the money you sent me. Yes, I kept it despite your instructions to use it for yourself. I knew someday you'd need a place to call home, even if you didn't know it yet. The property is north of Broken Creek, where the Chisos Mountains first rise from the plains. You'll know it by the 3 oak trees standing sentinel at the front gate. I need you to come. A final promise awaits you here, one that might give you what you've been searching for since Margaret died. The deed is in your name, but there's more to this legacy than land. Your friend until the end, Harrison Blackburn. Nate's hand trembled slightly as he folded the letter and tucked it into his own pocket. Harrison Blackburn. They'd fought side by side in Tennessee, saved each other's lives more times than either could count. After the war, they'd gone their separate ways, Harrison to find peace, Nate to find something else. Absolution, perhaps. Or maybe just a quicker way to die that didn't involve putting a gun in his own mouth. He looked down at the dead man again, understanding clicking into place. These weren't random bounty hunters. They'd been sent to intercept him, to ensure he never reached Harrison's ranch, which meant whatever was waiting for him there was valuable enough that someone wanted to prevent his arrival. Nate returned to his horse, a sturdy dun gelding that had carried him faithfully for 2 years. The animal nickered softly as he approached. Looks like we've got a destination after all, old boy, Nate murmured, swinging himself into the saddle despite the protest from his wounded shoulder. He sat still for a moment, the weight of the letter heavy in his pocket. 7 years had passed since Margaret died in his arms, blood seeping through her nightdress, where the knife had entered. 7 years of drifting, taking jobs that put him in the path of bullets, hoping one might eventually find its mark and end his misery. His hand unconsciously moved to the silver wedding band he still wore. Before the light had faded from Margaret's eyes, she'd made him promise find his way back to being a man who could build a home, not just destroy them. 7 years and he still hadn't found a way to keep that promise. Maybe, just maybe, Harrison had found it for him. Nate turned his horse northward toward Broken Creek and the Chisos Mountains beyond, toward whatever final promise his old friend had left for him. The landscape grew more rugged as Nate rode north. Flat plains gave way to rolling hills, which in turn yielded to the first craggy foothills of the Chisos Mountains. The air cooled slightly with the elevation, bringing welcome relief from the Texas heat. His shoulder throbbed with each hoofbeat. He'd done what he could with it, cleaned the wound with whiskey, packed it with a strip of relatively clean cloth, but it needed proper tending. Fever was setting in. He could feel the unnatural warmth in his skin, the slight cloudiness in his thoughts. As the third day of riding dawned, Nate spotted a weathered wooden sign half hidden by overgrown brush. Broken Creek, 5 miles. He was close. His mind drifted as he rode, memories surfacing unbidden. Harrison Blackburn had been different from the other men in their regiment. Quieter, more thoughtful. While others spent their nights playing cards or drinking whatever rot gut they could find, Harrison would often be found writing letters to his wife Martha, or reading one of the small books he somehow always managed to keep dry and intact despite the mud and rain of camp. They'd been an unlikely pair, Nate, the hardened sharpshooter, with uncanny accuracy and a growing reputation for being able to make impossible shots, and Harrison, the gentle giant, who'd been a schoolteacher before the war. Yet they'd formed a bond forged in blood and gunpowder that neither had expected to survive the conflict. The last time Nate had seen Harrison was in 1870, 5 years ago. Nate had been in a bad way then. Then, drinking heavily, taking increasingly dangerous jobs, caring little whether he lived or died. Harrison had found him in a saloon in El Paso, dragged him outside, and sobered him up with harsh words and cold water. "You think Margaret would want this?" Harrison had demanded, his normally calm voice raised in anger. "You think this is keeping your promise to her?" Nate had swung at him, then a wild, drunken punch that Harrison had easily sidestepped. When Nate had fallen face first into the dirt, Harrison had helped him up, dusted him off, and taken him to a hotel room. The next morning, Harrison had pressed a small leather pouch into Nate's hand. Inside was enough money to start fresh. "I can't take this," Nate had protested. "You can and you will," Harrison had insisted. "But promise me you'll use it to build something, not destroy yourself." Nate had promised, though he hadn't kept his word. He'd sent the money back to Harrison months later, unable to bring himself to use it for any purpose. By then, he'd taken up bounty hunting, using his skills with a rifle to track wanted men. It wasn't building anything, but at least it put his talents to use against men who deserved their fate. Or so he told himself. The sound of running water pulled Nate from his memories. A small creek cut across the path, ahead its clear waters bubbling over the smooth stones. Beyond it, the trail wound upward into a small valley nestled between hills. And there, standing sentinel, just as Harrison's letter had described, were 3 oak trees marking a rough-hewn gate. Nate reined his horse to a stop, studying the property beyond. The ranch house was modest but solid, built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. A barn stood nearby, its red paint faded to a dull rust. Several smaller outbuildings dotted the property, and beyond them, a pasture stretched toward the base of a steep hill. It was a good piece of land, defensible with clear sight lines in most directions. A natural spring fed the creek, ensuring water even in dry seasons. The soil looked fertile enough to grow crops, and the pasture would support a small herd of cattle or horses. The kind of place where a man might keep a promise to build rather than destroy. As Nate urged his horse forward through the gate, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. On a small rise behind the house, 2 crosses stood in the unmistakable outline of graves. The earth around them was still fresh, the wood of the markers unweathered. Harrison's letter had said he was already gone. Nate had assumed his friend had moved on, not that he'd died, but there were 2 graves, not one. Harrison and Martha. A wave of grief washed over Nate, unexpected in its intensity. He hadn't seen his friend in 5 years yet. The confirmation of his death felt like losing a brother. Lost in his thoughts, Nate almost missed the slight movement at the corner of the barn, a shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows. His instincts, honed by years of tracking and being tracked, snapped him back to full alertness. He wasn't alone. Nate's hand dropped to his revolver, but he didn't draw. Not yet. Whoever was watching him could have shot him already if that was their intention. I mean no harm, he called out, his voice rough from disuse and trail dust. I'm Nathaniel McAllister. Harrison Blackburn sent for me. Silence answered him. The shadow near the barn didn't move. Nate slowly dismounted, wincing as the motion pulled at his wounded shoulder. He kept his hands visible away from his weapons. Harrison was my friend, he continued. I just learned of his passing. I'm sorry I'm too late to. The sudden impact of something striking the wooden post beside his head cut off his words. Nate froze, eyes focusing on the arrow, now quivering in the wood, its stone tip embedded a mere inch from where his face had been. It wasn't a warning shot. It was a perfect miss meant to demonstrate skill without causing harm. Yet, Nate remained absolutely still, eyes scanning the property. The arrow had come from his right, somewhere near the house, not from the barn, where he'd spotted movement, which meant there were at least two people. Next one goes through your eye, a woman's voice called out clear and steady. State your business, stranger. Before Nate could respond, three figures emerged from various hiding spots, one from behind the house, one from the barn, and one from what appeared to be a root cellar whose doors lay open near the garden. They were women, no girls, young women. Native American, Apache by their features and the distinctive patterns woven into their clothing. The oldest couldn't have been more than 24, the youngest perhaps 16. The eldest stepped forward, a bow still drawn, and aimed squarely at Nate's chest. Her face was a mask of determination, her dark eyes assessing every detail of his appearance. I asked your business, she repeated. Nate kept his hands raised. As I said, I'm Nathaniel McAllister. Harrison Blackburn was my friend from the war. He sent me a letter asking me to come. The young woman's eyes narrowed. Harrison's been dead 3 weeks. I just learned of it today, Nate replied evenly. I'm sorry for your loss. He was a good man. The tension in the air was palpable. The youngest of the three women clutched a knife, her knuckles white around the handle. The middle one held what looked like a small leather pouch, perhaps containing something to throw. The eldest, still training her arrow on Nate, studied him with such intensity that he felt as though she were looking straight through to his soul. You're hurt, she finally said, nodding toward the bloodstain on his shoulder. Got shot. It's nothing serious. Luna, the middle one said quietly in the direction of the eldest. It's him, the man from the photograph. Luna, the eldest, hesitated, then slowly lowered her bow, though she didn't fully relax the string. Harrison kept a picture, she explained, her voice still wary. You and him in uniform. He said if a tall man with gray at his temples and eyes like winter came, we should trust you. Her lips tightened. He didn't say you'd bring trouble with you. Nate frowned. What trouble? You're bleeding. That means someone shot you. That means someone might be following you. Luna nodded to the middle sister. Ayasha checked his wound. Kimmy watched the trail. The youngest Kimmy nodded and darted away toward the gate, moving with the silent grace of a deer. Ayasha approached Nate cautiously, her steps measured. I need to see the wound, she said, her voice softer than her sister's, but no less firm. Nate nodded slowly, removing his duster and unbuttoning his shirt to expose the injury. The cloth he'd packed against it was soaked through with blood, and the skin around the wound was angry and red. Ayasha's expression remained neutral as she examined it, but her eyes betrayed concern. The bullet went through clean, but it's infected. You need medicine. I've had worse, Nate replied. Luna snorted. Men always say that. She finally relaxed her bowstring completely, though she kept the arrow nocked. Why did Harrison send for you, and why now? Nate reached slowly into his pocket, telegraphing his movements. He sent this letter. I found it on a man who tried to kill me. He held it out. Luna took it, her eyes scanning the words. Something in her expression shifted, a softening perhaps, or recognition. The final promise, she murmured almost to herself. What does it mean? Nate asked. Luna folded the letter and handed it back to him. It means you should come inside. We have much to discuss, Nathaniel McAllister. She turned toward the house, then paused. And if you make any move to harm my sisters, I'll put an arrow through your heart before you can blink. Nate believed her. The interior of the ranch house was cooler than the Texas heat outside its thick stone walls, providing natural insulation. It was sparsely but comfortably furnished with handcrafted wooden tables and chairs, a stone hearth, and simple woven rugs covering portions of the plank floor. Luna gestured for Nate to sit at the kitchen table, while Ayesha gathered supplies to treat his wound. The young woman worked in silence, cleaning the injury with a mixture that smelled of alcohol and herbs. It stung fiercely, but Nate didn't flinch. "You've had practice with this," he observed quietly. Ayesha's hands were steady and skilled. "Harrison's wife Martha was a nurse during the war. She taught me." "Martha was a good woman," Nate said. "I only met her once, but Harrison spoke of her often." "She died first," Luna said from where she stood near the doorway, still watching Nate with wary eyes. "The fever took her 2 days before Harrison followed." A sadness passed over Ayesha's face as she applied a poultice to Nate's wound. "We did everything we could. My medicines, Martha's medicines. Nothing helped." "I'm sorry," Nate said and meant it. Kimmy, the youngest, slipped back into the house. "No one on the trail," she reported to Luna. Her gaze fell on Nate, curiosity evident in her expression. "Are you really the man from the photograph? The one Harrison called the best shot in Tennessee?" A ghost of a smile touched Nate's lips. He exaggerated. "I missed plenty." "But not when it mattered," Luna interjected. "That's what he said. Nate never misses when it matters." Ayesha finished bandaging the wound and stepped back. "You should rest. The herbs will help with the infection, but your body needs time to heal." Nate nodded his thanks but kept his attention on Luna. "You still haven't told me what Harrison meant by a final promise, or why he wanted me here." Luna exchanged glances with her sisters, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, she pulled out a chair and sat across from Nate. "Harrison Blackburn and his wife saved our lives," she began. Her voice measured. 10 years ago, soldiers attacked our village. I was 14, Ayesha 12, Kimmy just 6. Our parents were killed. We were captured and taken to be sold. Nate's jaw tightened. He knew of such practices, though they were less common now than in earlier years. The selling of captives, especially young girls, was a dark chapter in the history of the frontier. "Harrison and Martha bought us at the market in El Paso," Luna continued, "but not for the reasons other men bought native girls." Her eyes hardened at memories Nate could only imagine. "They brought us here, gave us a home, taught us to read and write English. They treated us like daughters." "They were good people," Ayesha added softly. "Martha showed me how to combine my people's medicine with the white man's knowledge. Harrison taught us about the law, about property, about how to survive in this world." "But not everyone sees us as people," Luna said, her voice taking on an edge. "To many, we are still just property, savages. And when Harrison became ill, he knew what might happen to us when he was gone." Kimmy, who had been quiet, spoke up. "He said you would come. He said you would protect us like he did." Nate felt the weight of that expectation settle onto his shoulders, heavier than any burden he had carried since Margaret's death. "Why me?" "Because Luna said he trusted you, and because he believed you needed us as much as we need you." The statement hung in the air, challenging Nate's understanding of his purpose here. Before he could respond, Ayesha placed a steaming mug in front of him. "Drink this," she instructed. "It will help with the fever and pain." Nate accepted the mug, breathing in the earthy, bitter smell. "I'm not sure I'm what Harrison thought I was," he said after taking a sip. The liquid was unpleasant but not intolerable. "I'm not the same man he knew during the war." "None of us are who we were before," Luna replied. "But Harrison believed in you until the end. He said you were a man who kept his promises even when they were hard to keep." Margaret's face flashed in Nate's mind, her smile, her eyes, the way she'd looked at him on their wedding day. And then, unbidden, the image of her final moments, the light fading from those same eyes as she made him promise to find his way back to being a man who could build rather than destroy. A promise he'd failed to keep for 7 long years. "I'll stay until my shoulder heals," Nate finally said. "Beyond that, I can't make any guarantees." Luna studied him for a long moment, then nodded once as if having confirmed something to herself. "Fair enough. You can have Harrison's room. It's the one at the end of the hall." As Ayesha led him to the bedroom, Nate felt the tension of the day catching up with him. The herb mixture was making him drowsy, dulling the pain in his shoulder and the edges of his thoughts. The room was simple, a bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, a chair by the window. On the wall hung the photograph Luna had mentioned, Nate and Harrison, in their Confederate gray, standing side by side, their expressions serious, but their eyes alive with the peculiar brotherhood that forms between men who face death together. Nate sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over him in waves. As he lay back, his last conscious thought was of Harrison's letter and the mysterious final promise that had drawn him here. Whatever it was, he had a feeling it would change everything. The fever dreams came as Nate slept, vivid and disjointed. Margaret reaching for him across a widening chasm. Harrison standing on the other side, beckoning. Three shadowy figures with bows and arrows guarding a treasure Nate couldn't identify. And through it all, a voice, sometimes Margaret's, sometimes Harrison's, repeating the same words, "Keep your promise." He awoke to moonlight streaming through the window, his shirt soaked with sweat, but his mind clearer than before. The fever had broken. Whatever Ayasha had given him had done its work. Nate sat up slowly, testing his shoulder. The pain was still there, but duller, more manageable. He could move his arm without feeling like a hot poker was being driven into his flesh. The house was quiet. By the position of the moon, he guessed it was well past midnight. Everyone would be asleep. Carefully, he rose and moved to the window. The ranch lay bathed in silver moonlight, peaceful and still. From this vantage point, he could see the two graves on the hillside, the crosses casting long shadows across the freshly turned earth. A movement on the porch caught his eye. Someone was sitting in one of the rocking chairs, a silhouette against the backdrop of the moonlit landscape. Nate pulled on his boots and made his way quietly through the house. The floorboards creaked slightly beneath his weight, but he moved with the practiced stealth of a man accustomed to going unnoticed when necessary. Luna turned her head slightly when he stepped onto the porch, acknowledging his presence without speaking. She held a glass of amber liquid whiskey by the smell of it. "Thought you'd be out longer," she said after a moment. "Ayasha's medicine usually puts men twice your size to sleep for a full day." "I've built up a tolerance to many things," Nate replied, leaning against the porch railing. His shoulder protested, but he ignored it. Luna studied him, then reached beside her chair and produced another glass and a bottle. She poured a measure and held it out to him. "Harrison's private stock," she explained. "He saved it for special occasions." Nate accepted the glass, the irony not lost on him. The last time he'd seen Harrison, his friend had been lecturing him about drinking too much. Now here he was sharing Harrison's whiskey with a young Apache woman under a Texas moon. Life took strange turns. They drank in silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle creaking of Luna's rocking chair and the distant call of nightbirds. "He talked about you," Luna finally said, her voice softer than Nate had heard it before. "Said you were the best man he ever knew, and the most dangerous." Nate's mouth twitched. That sounds like Harrison, always seeing both sides of a person. "Was he right? Are you dangerous?" "To some," Nate acknowledged. He took another sip of whiskey, feeling its warm path down his throat. "Not to you or your sisters, if that's what you're asking." Luna nodded as if confirming something to herself. "The men who shot you, they won't be the last to come, will they?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Nate considered lying, offering false reassurance, but something told him Luna wasn't the type of woman who appreciated being shielded from hard truths. "Probably not," he admitted. "Someone doesn't want me here. Someone who knows about Harrison's letter and what it might mean." "Judge Prescott," Luna said, the name like venom on her lips. "Who coined Walter Prescott? The circuit judge for this territory. He wants this land." Luna's hand tightened around her glass. "He's been trying to claim it since before Harrison fell ill. Says 3 Indian girls can't legally own property no matter what Harrison's will says." The pieces began to fall into place in Nate's mind. "And you think he sent those men to stop me from reaching the ranch?" "I know he did," Luna replied with certainty. "His son Ethan was here 2 days after Harrison died. Said the ranch would be auctioned for taxes unless we had a white man to stand for us in court." Her dark eyes met Nate's. "Harrison said you would come, that you would be that man." Nate looked out over the moonlit property, understanding growing within him. This was the final promise Harrison had written about. Not just a piece of land, but a purpose, a chance to protect something instead of destroying it, a way to keep his promise to Margaret at last. "Why does Prescott want this land so badly?" he asked. "It's a good piece of property, but there's better to be had with less trouble." Luna rose from her chair and moved to stand beside him at the railing. "Look there," she said, pointing toward the mountains rising in the distance. "The railroad wants to build a line through the pass. This ranch sits at the only viable route for miles. Whoever controls this land controls access to the pass. And the judge stands to profit greatly. Luna's voice was bitter. He's been buying up all the land along the proposed route. Most people sell willingly, he offers good prices. But Harrison refused. Because of you three, she nodded. This is our home now, the only one we have left. Nate drained the last of his whiskey, the pieces fitting together in his mind. Harrison had known that without protection, the three women would lose everything once he was gone. He'd reached out to Nate not just as a friend, but as someone with the skills and reputation to stand against men like Judge Prescott. I'm not sure I'm the right man for this, Nate said honestly. I've spent the last 7 years trying to get myself killed, not protecting others. Luna turned to look at him directly, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. Harrison said you made a promise to your wife before she died, a promise you hadn't been able to keep. The statement hit Nate like a physical blow. He hadn't told Harrison the exact words he'd exchanged with Margaret in her final moments. He must have guessed or perhaps just known Nate well enough to understand. He said this might be your last chance to keep it, Luna continued. That's why he called it a final promise. Not just his promise to us, but yours to her. The night air suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. Nate set his empty glass on the railing with a hand that wasn't quite steady. I need to think, he said. Luna reached out, surprising him by placing her hand briefly on his uninjured arm. Think all you need, but know this, we won't leave this land willingly. If you choose not to help us, we'll fight anyway. We'll just die doing it. She gathered the bottle and glasses and moved toward the door. Before entering, she paused. Harrison believed in you, Nathaniel McAllister. He said when it mattered most, you never missed your shot. He thought this us mattered. She disappeared into the house, leaving Nate alone with the moon, the distant mountains, and the weight of promises both kept and broken. Dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Nate had remained on the porch for hours after Luna left, thinking, remembering wrestling with ghosts he'd long tried to outrun. Now, as the first rays of sunlight touched the crosses on the hill behind the house, he made his way toward them. The climb was gentle, but enough to make his wounded shoulder throb in protest. The graves were simple, the earth still fresh. Small stones had been placed along the perimeters in a pattern Nate recognized as Apache, a blending of traditions just as the lives within the ranch house represented a blending of worlds. You always did know how to back a man into a corner, Harrison, Nate said softly to the grave on the right. Couldn't just ask outright, had to make it about keeping promises. A breeze stirred the grass around the graves, rustling like a whispered response. I'm not who I was, Nate continued, not the man you knew during the war. I've done things, Harrison. Things that can't be undone. He knelt beside the graves, feeling the morning sun warm on his back. But you knew that, didn't you? You knew, and you still sent for me. Nate shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. Always did see something in me I couldn't see myself. From this vantage point, he could see the entire ranch spread below the house, the barn, the garden where young plants were beginning to grow, the creek winding its way through the property. It was beautiful in the morning light, peaceful in a way few places Nate had known could claim to be. The kind of place Margaret would have loved. The sound of movement behind him alerted Nate to someone's approach. He didn't turn, recognizing the light, careful footsteps. You're up early, he said. Kimmy, the youngest of the sisters, came to stand beside him. Unlike Luna's constant wariness or Ayasha's quiet assessment, Kimmy's expression was open, curious. I come every morning, she said, her voice lighter than her sister's. I tell them about the rabbits in the garden and the hawk that built a nest in the big oak. She knelt and placed a small bundle of wildflowers between the graves. Harrison liked when I told him about the animals. Nate watched as she arranged the flowers with care. You were close to them. Kimmy nodded, a sadness passing over her young face. I don't remember much about my real parents. I was too small when they died. Harrison and Martha are the only father and mother I really knew. The simple statement carried a weight of loss that Nate understood all too well. Luna says you might leave soon. Kimmy continued, looking up at him with eyes too old for her young face. She says we shouldn't expect you to stay. Nate met her gaze. Your sister is practical. But Harrison said you would stay. He said you were a man who kept his word. Kimmy rose, dusting soil from her skirt. Were you there in the war with him? I was. Nate stood as well, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his shoulder. Did you kill people? The directness of the question caught Nate off guard, though it shouldn't have. Children often cut straight to the heart of matters adults prefer to circle. Yes, he answered honestly. Many. Kimmy nodded, accepting the truth without judgment. Harrison said he did too, but that it haunted him. Does it haunt you? Nate looked out over the ranch, considering his answer. Some deaths more than others. The ones who didn't deserve it. Those, Nate agreed, and the ones I should have prevented but couldn't. Kimmy was quiet for a moment, processing this. There's breakfast, she finally said. Ayasha sent me to tell you. She wants to check your wound too. As they walked back down the hill together, Kimmy spoke again. If you stay, I could show you the secret places on the ranch. The cave where mountain lions sometimes sleep. The pool where the biggest fish hide. Harrison liked when I showed him those things. There was hope in her voice, carefully contained but present nonetheless. Nate felt something shift within him, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart since Margaret's death. I'd like that, Kimmy, he said, if I stay. Her smile was quick but genuine, lighting her face in a way that reminded Nate painfully of the children he and Margaret had once hoped to have. Back at the house, the smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the kitchen. Ayasha was at the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. Luna sat at the table, studying what appeared to be a ledger. Your shoulder needs checking, Ayasha said without turning around. Sit. Nate complied, easing himself into a chair. Ayasha set aside her cooking and came to him, unwrapping the bandage with efficient movements. The infection is receding, she observed, probing gently around the wound. But you tore the flesh again. You need to rest the arm. I'll keep that in mind, Nate replied. Luna closed the ledger and regarded him with her usual measured assessment. Have you decided? Direct as always. Nate appreciated that about her. I need to know more, he said, about Judge Prescott and about the situation here, about what Harrison expected me to do. Luna opened her mouth to respond, but a sound from outside interrupted her hoofbeats approaching at a steady pace. All four of them froze, instantly alert. Luna moved to the window, staying to one side to remain unseen. 2 riders, she reported, her voice tense. Coming up the main trail. Nate stood, his hand automatically reaching for the revolver that wasn't there. His weapons were still with his saddlebags. Where are my guns? By the door, Kimmy said, already moving to retrieve them. Luna's expression was grim. If it's Prescott's men, they won't be alone for long. Nate checked his revolver and rifle, quickly ensuring both were loaded and ready. Years of practice had made the motions automatic, requiring no conscious thought. You 3 stay inside, he instructed. I'll handle this. Luna's eyes flashed. This is our home. We defend it together. Fine, Nate conceded, recognizing the determination in her stance. But let me do the talking first. No arrows unless I signal. Ayasha handed him a small leather pouch. Throw this at their feet if they attack. Don't breathe it in yourself. Nate tucked the pouch into his pocket without question, then moved to the door. He stepped onto the porch just as the riders came into clear view. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, well-dressed in a manner that spoke of wealth and position. His companion was younger, perhaps in his late 20s, with a hard face and cold eyes that immediately marked him as dangerous to Nate's experienced assessment. Both men reined their horses to a stop at the sight of Nate, standing on the porch, rifle held casually but ready at his side. This is private property, Nate called out. The older man studied Nate for a moment, then smiled, a practiced expression that never reached his eyes. I believe you're mistaken, sir, he replied, his voice carrying the educated tones of the eastern states. This property is currently in legal dispute. I'm Judge Walter Prescott, the circuit judge for this territory. He gestured to his companion. My son, Ethan. The younger man, Ethan, was staring at Nate with an intensity that went beyond normal curiosity. There was recognition there and something else. Satisfaction, perhaps. I know who you are, Ethan said, his mouth curving into a smile that sent a chill down Nate's spine. Nathaniel McAllister, the sharpshooter from Tennessee. He laughed, the sound without humor. Well, I'll be damned. The bounty hunters actually did their job. They just didn't live to collect their pay. Nate kept his expression neutral, but internally pieces were falling into place. Ethan Prescott had sent the men who tried to kill him, not to prevent him from reaching the ranch, but to ensure he did. But why? Judge Prescott cleared his throat. You'll have to excuse my son's manners, Mr. McAllister. We weren't properly introduced. His eyes narrowed slightly. May I ask what business you have at the Blackburn Ranch? Behind Nate, the door opened. Luna stepped out, her bow conspicuously absent, but her stance no less ready for conflict. Mr. McAllister is here at the late Mr. Blackburn's request, she said, her voice steady and formal, as executor of the estate. This was news to Nate, but he didn't let his surprise show. Instead, he simply nodded, playing along with whatever strategy Luna was employing. Judge Prescott's facade of politeness slipped, momentarily revealing the hard calculation beneath. Is that so? How interesting. I wasn't aware Harrison had appointed an executor. It's all legal and proper, Luna continued. The documents were filed with the territorial office in El Paso last month. Well, this changes matters somewhat, the judge said, recovering his composure. You understand, Mr. McAllister, that there are certain complications regarding this property. I'm beginning to get the picture, Nate replied. Ethan Prescott had not taken his eyes off Nate. You know there's quite a price on your head in certain parts of Texas for a man who killed a marshal in Laredo 2 years back. Nate's expression didn't change, but inwardly he cursed. That particular incident had been self-defense. The marshal in question had been on the payroll of a cattle baron and had drawn first. But Nate doubted that detail would matter much to a circuit judge looking for leverage. Interesting time for you to show up here, Ethan continued, his smile growing. Almost like someone wanted you found. And there it was, the trap laid out in the open. Ethan had arranged for the bounty hunters to find Nate using Harrison's letter as bait. He'd expected them to either kill Nate or drive him to the ranch where Ethan could use the outstanding bounty as leverage. Judge Prescott sighed as if disappointed in his son's lack of subtlety. What my son is trying to say, Mr. McAllister, is that we might be able to help each other. You have legal problems. I happen to be a judge. And all I have to do is convince the Apache girls to leave, Nate finished for him. They have no legal right to this property, Prescott said, his voice hardening, no matter what Harrison Blackburn might have told them. The law is clear on this matter. Luna's hand brushed against Nate's arm, a silent signal. From the corner of his eye, he could see Ayasha and Kimmy watching from the window, ready. I'll need time to review the situation, Nate said, intentionally vague. As executor, I have responsibilities to consider. Judge Prescott studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Of course. Take a few days. Consider your options carefully. His gaze shifted to Luna. All of you should consider your options. Ethan looked as if he wanted to say more, but a sharp glance from his father silenced him. We'll return in 3 days, the judge said, gathering his reins. I trust by then you'll have reached the sensible conclusion, Mr. McAllister. As the two men turned their horses and rode away, Luna spoke quietly beside Nate. You see now what we're facing. Nate watched the riders disappear down the trail, his mind working through the implications of the encounter. They set a trap for me, he said, used Harrison's letter to draw me in. And now they'll use the bounty on your head to control you, Luna agreed. Unless I help you fight them, Nate finished. He turned to face her. Did Harrison really appoint me executor of his estate? A ghost of a smile touched Luna's lips. No, but he did leave something for you, something that might change everything. She held his gaze, a challenge in her dark eyes. It's time you knew the whole truth, Nathaniel McAllister. About Harrison, about us. Her voice lowered. And about your father. My father, Nate repeated, confusion evident in his voice. My father has been dead for 20 years. What could he possibly have to do with this? Luna's expression was unreadable. Everything, she said simply. He has everything to do with why we're all here now. And with that cryptic statement, she turned and walked back into the house, leaving Nate standing on the porch with more questions than answers, and the distinct feeling that he'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a land dispute in the Texas borderlands. Nate followed Luna into the ranch house, her words about his father echoing in his mind. The kitchen felt suddenly too small, the air too heavy with unspoken truths. Ayasha and Kimmy exchanged glances, clearly aware of what was coming. Sit, Luna instructed, gesturing to the table. Nate remained standing. I want answers, now. Luna's eyes flashed with momentary defiance, then softened with understanding. She nodded once and moved to a small cabinet near the stone hearth. From it, she withdrew a wooden box weathered with age but well-maintained. She placed it on the table and stepped back. "Harrison left this for you," she said quietly. "He said when the time came, it would explain everything." Nate approached the box cautiously as though it might contain something dangerous. In a way it did. The past had always been more threatening to him than any loaded gun. The box wasn't locked. Its hinges creaked as he lifted the lid, revealing a leather-bound journal and a folded piece of yellowed paper. Beneath these lay a tarnished silver pocket watch that Nate recognized immediately. His father's watch, which he'd assumed lost decades ago. "How did Harrison get this?" Nate asked, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "Read the journal," Luna replied. "Start with the entry marked by the red ribbon." Nate lifted the journal, feeling its weight in his hands, the weight of secrets and memories. A faded red cloth ribbon marked a page halfway through. He opened it there and began to read. April 18th, 1865. "The war is over, but some wounds will never heal. Today I met Samuel McAllister again, the first time since we parted ways in Tennessee. He's changed, hardened in ways that go beyond what battle does to a man. We spoke of his son Nathaniel, who has distinguished himself as a sharpshooter in the conflict. Samuel spoke with pride, but also fear. Fear that the killing has changed his boy irrevocably. Samuel confessed something terrible to me tonight, something that weighs heavily on his soul. Before the war, he led a raid on an Apache village near the border. He believed they were harboring Mexican raiders who had stolen cattle from his employer's ranch. He was wrong. The village was peaceful with no connection to the raiders. 17 people died that day. Samuel carries each death like a stone around his neck. But it's worse than that. He took 3 young girls, captive sisters. He sold them to slave traders in El Paso. He was drunk when he did it, he says, out of his mind with guilt over the killings. When he sobered, he tried to find them again, to undo what he'd done, but they were gone. He made me promise something tonight. If I ever found those girls, I was to protect them. And if something happened to him, I was to tell his son the truth, no matter how painful. Nathaniel must know, he said. He must have the chance to right my wrong. Samuel is dying consumption, the doctors say. He won't last the year. I've promised to honor his request, though I pray I never find those girls. Some wounds are better left unprobed. Nate's hands trembled as he turned the page. His father, the man he'd idolized as a child, the man whose moral compass had guided his early years, a murderer of innocence and seller of children. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He looked up at Luna, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "You," he said softly. "Your village. It was my father who—" Luna's face remained impassive, but her eyes held a depth of emotion that spoke of years of pain carefully contained. "Yes," she confirmed. "Samuel McAllister led the raid that killed our parents. He is the man who sold us." Nate closed the journal, needing a moment to process this terrible truth. His shoulder wound throbbed in time with his heartbeat, a physical counterpoint to the emotional pain lancing through him. Why didn't Harrison tell me? He asked the question, directed as much at the absent Harrison as at the women before him. All those years, he never said a word. "Keep reading," Luna urged. "There's more." Nate reopened the journal, turning to the next entry. December 3rd, 1870. "I found them. After 5 years of searching, I finally found the 3 Apache sisters. They were being sold again, passed from owner to owner like cattle. The oldest, she calls herself Luna, now looked at me with such hatred when I approached the auction block. She thought I was just another white man come to use them and discard them. I paid more than I could afford nearly every dollar I had saved. Martha didn't question it when I brought them home. My sweet Martha, who sees the best in everyone, even in a broken old soldier like me. I haven't told Luna and her sisters the truth about how I came to look for them. I haven't mentioned Samuel McAllister. The wounds are too fresh, the hatred too justified. Perhaps someday, when trust has been built, I will tell them everything. For now, it is enough that they are safe. I wrote to Nathaniel today asking him to visit. I couldn't bring myself to put the truth in a letter. Some things must be said face to face. He didn't respond. I've heard rumors that he's drinking heavily, taking risks no sane man would consider. The war changed him, just as Samuel feared it would. I will try again when the time is right. Samuel's watch sits in my drawer, waiting to be returned to his son, along with the burden of truth it represents. Nate turned pages, scanning through the years of entries. He saw his own name appear occasionally. Harrison noting failed attempts to reach him, reports of Nate's exploits as a bounty hunter, concerns about his self-destructive path. The final entry was dated just 3 weeks ago, the handwriting noticeably shakier than the earlier pages. March 30th, 1875, I am dying. The doctor doesn't say it, but I can see it in his eyes. Martha's already gone taken by the same fever that now burns through me. My only comfort is that I will join her soon. My greatest regret is that I never told Nathaniel the truth. The girls know now I told Luna everything last week. I expected hatred, but instead found forgiveness. Not for Samuel, that would be asking too much, but for my part in keeping the secret. I've written to Nathaniel one last time. I've arranged for the letter to reach him through channels that will ensure he receives it even in his wandering life. I pray he comes. These girls need protection and he needs redemption. Samuel's sin hangs between them like a shadow, but perhaps in confronting it together they might all find peace. The ranch is legally theirs now. Martha and I signed the papers months ago when I first fell ill, but the law is a fickle thing where Indians are concerned, especially young women, without a white man to stand for them. Judge Prescott has made his intentions clear. He wants this land for the railroad, and he won't let 3 Apache girls stand in his way. Nathaniel is their best hope, a man with his reputation, his skills. He could keep them safe. And they, with their quiet strength and capacity for forgiveness, might just save him from himself. It's a final promise I make to all of them, to bring them together, to give them all a chance at healing. If you're reading this, Nate, know that I never judged you for the path you've walked. We all carry burdens from the war, from choices made and unmade. But it's never too late to find your way back. Margaret knew that. It's why she made you promise to build rather than destroy. This is your chance to keep that promise. Your friend until the end, Harrison Nate, closed the journal slowly, its weight in his hands now carrying the burden of 2 generations of sin and redemption. The room was silent, save for the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth and the distant call of a bird outside. Now you know, Luna said quietly. Harrison wanted you to know everything. Nate looked at each of the sisters in turn, Luna standing straight and proud despite the weight of her past. Ayasha, her gentle eyes holding wisdom beyond her years, and Kimmy, who barely remembered the village where she was born, but carried its loss in her blood nonetheless. Victims of his father's cruelty, a legacy of violence he never knew he'd inherited. I'm sorry, he said, the words woefully inadequate for the magnitude of the wrong done to them. What my father did was not your doing, Ayasha interjected softly. Harrison made sure we understood that. But it is my responsibility now. Nate replied, the realization settling over him with the weight of truth. That's what Harrison intended. That's why he brought us together. Luna nodded. He believed you needed this as much as we need you, a chance to make right what was done wrong. Nate ran his hand over the journal's worn cover, thinking of Harrison, his friend who had carried this burden for years, who had sought to honor a deathbed promise to a man who didn't deserve such loyalty. Judge Prescott, he said, bringing the conversation back to the immediate threat. He won't stop with threats. Men like him never do. No, Luna agreed. He won't. His son is even worse, cruel for the pleasure of it. Kimmy, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. They killed Harrison. Nate's head snapped up. What? Kimmy, Ayasha cautioned. He should know, Kimmy insisted. The fever wasn't natural. Ethan Prescott came here 2 days before Harrison fell ill. He brought food, said it was a peace offering. Her young face hardened with conviction. Harrison was fine until he ate it. You can't know that for certain, Ayasha said, though her tone suggested she harbored the same suspicion. It doesn't matter if we can prove it, Luna cut in. What matters is that they want this land and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Nate nodded, his tactical mind already shifting to the problem at hand. How long before they come back with more men? 3 days, he said, Luna replied, but I wouldn't trust a Prescott to keep his word. They could come tonight. Then we prepare, Nate said, decision made. Whatever his personal feelings about the revelations of the past hour, the immediate danger was clear. Show me everything about the property, every approach, every defensive position, every escape route. Luna studied him for a moment as if gauging his commitment. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she nodded once briskly. Kimmy knows every inch of this land, she said. She'll show you. As the day progressed, Nate's respect for the 3 sisters grew. They weren't helpless victims waiting to be saved. They were survivors who had built a life despite everything the world had thrown at them. Kimmy led him around the property with the sure-footed confidence of someone who knew every rock and tree. She showed him the hidden spring that fed the creek, even in drought, the cave system that ran beneath the eastern ridge, the high points that offered the best views of approaching riders. Harrison taught us to shoot, she explained as they paused on a bluff overlooking the main trail. Luna is the best with a bow, but I'm better with a rifle. Nate raised an eyebrow. Are you now? A hint of a smile touched Kimmy's lips. I hit what I aim at. That's a start, Nate acknowledged. But hitting what you aim at in practice is different from hitting what you aim at when someone is shooting back. Kimmy's smile faded. I know. I'm not a child. Nate studied her 16 years old, but with eyes that had seen more darkness than many grown men. No, she wasn't a child, not really. Childhood had been stolen from her the day Samuel McAllister rode into her village. His father. The thought still burned like acid. I'd like to see you shoot sometime, he said, changing the subject. Maybe you can teach me a thing or two. That earned him another smile, brief but genuine. They continued their survey of the property, Nate noting defensible positions and vulnerabilities with the practiced eye of a veteran. By the time they returned to the house, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Ayasha was in the garden harvesting herbs that she placed carefully in a woven basket. She looked up as they approached, her expression serene despite the circumstances. How is your shoulder? Manageable, Nate replied. Ayasha's eyes, observant as always, saw through the understatement. It needs tending again. The ride and the stress won't have helped it heal. Nate didn't argue. He followed her inside, where she directed him to sit at the kitchen table. With the same gentle efficiency she'd shown earlier, she removed the bandage and examined the wound. The infection is still present, she observed, but not spreading. I'll make a stronger poultice. As she worked grinding herbs with a stone mortar and pestle, she spoke without looking up. Harrison told me once that in the old ways of my people, wounds of the body were seen as reflections of wounds of the spirit. To heal one, you must address the other. Nate watched her hands steady and sure in their movements. Is that what you believe? I believe there is wisdom in it, she replied. Your body fights the infection in your shoulder, but your spirit fights something else. The truth about your father, perhaps. Nate's jaw tightened. My father died a long time ago. Did he? Ayasha looked up, her dark eyes searching his face. Or has he been living in you all this time in the image you held of him? The question struck too close to home. Nate had spent years trying to live up to the memory of Samuel McAllister, a stern but fair man, a man of principle, or so he'd believed. We carry our parents with us, Ayasha continued, returning to her work. Their virtues and their sins. We choose which to honor. My father was a murderer, Nate said, the words bitter on his tongue. He slaughtered innocents and sold children. What part of that should I honor? Ayasha didn't flinch at the harshness in his tone. Perhaps none of it, but you are not him, Nathaniel McAllister. The choice of what kind of man to be has always been yours. She applied the fresh poultice to his wound, the herbs cool against his inflamed skin. As she worked, Nate found himself studying her face, the high cheekbones, the quiet dignity in her expression, the wisdom in eyes too young to hold such depth. How do you do it? He asked suddenly. How do you not hate me for what he did? Ayasha's hands paused momentarily, then resumed their careful wrapping of the bandage. Hate is a fire that consumes the one who carries it, she said softly. I watched it nearly destroy Luna in the early years. She burned with it, wasted away with it, until Martha showed her another way. What way? To live well, despite what was done to us. To find beauty and purpose, even in pain. Ayasha secured the bandage and stepped back. Besides, you are not your father. Your hands did not hold the knife that killed my parents. Your voice did not give the order that destroyed our village. But my blood. Blood is just blood, she interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. It's choices that define a person, not ancestry. You've made your share of dark choices, I don't doubt. But so have we all in surviving this world. She gathered her supplies, preparing to return them to their places. Before she left the table, she paused, looking directly into Nate's eyes. Harrison believed you were a good man who had lost his way. That's why he sent for you, not because of your father's sin, but because of your own potential for redemption. With that, she left him to his thoughts, which swirled like autumn leaves in a windstorm, chaotic, uncontrollable, impossible to grasp. Evening brought a hushed quality to the ranch, a deceptive peacefulness that belied the danger lurking on the horizon. Luna had stationed herself on the porch, rifle across her knees, watching the trail with unwavering vigilance. Ayesha prepared a simple but hearty meal of stew and cornbread, the domestic normalcy of it striking Nate as oddly comforting amid the turmoil of the day. They ate together at the kitchen table, the conversation sparse but not uncomfortable. Kimmy spoke of a fox she'd seen near the creek that morning, its coat so red it seemed to glow in the dawn light. Ayesha mentioned that the herb garden needed expanding if they were to have enough medicinal plants for the winter. Luna said little, her mind clearly on the threats that loomed. After the meal, as Kimmy and Ayesha cleared the dishes, Nate took out Harrison's journal again. There was more to read, more to understand about how his old friend had come to this place, to these women, to this final request. Luna noticed his interest. "There's more," she said quietly, "in his study." She led him to a small room off the main hallway, a space that clearly had been Harrison's private sanctuary. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes ranging from practical manuals on ranching to poetry and philosophy. A solid oak desk stood beneath the window, its surface neat and ordered even in its owner's absence. Luna crossed to a painting on the wall, a landscape of mountains that Nate recognized as the view from the ranch. She removed it, revealing a small safe built into the wall behind it. "The combination is your wedding date," she said, stepping back. "Harrison said you'd remember it." Nate stared at the safe, then at Luna. "How would he know my wedding date?" "He knew more about you than you might think," she replied. "He kept track of you over the years, even when you thought no one was watching." Nate approached the safe, his fingers hesitating over the dial. April 12th, 1866. The happiest day of his life and the beginning of the shortest. He and Margaret had had barely a year together before she was taken from him. The lock clicked open on the third number. Inside lay a stack of papers, legal documents by the look of them, and another smaller journal. Nate removed both, setting them on the desk. The top document was a deed to the ranch dated 6 months earlier. It listed the owners as Luna, Ayesha, and Kimmy, their Apache names written first, followed by the English names Martha and Harrison had given them. The document was properly notarized and bore the seal of the Territorial Land Office. "This looks legal," Nate observed, scanning the formal language. "It is," Luna confirmed. "Harrison made sure of it. He paid extra to have it filed properly with multiple copies in different offices." "Then why is Judge Prescott so confident he can take the land?" Luna's expression darkened. "Because the law protects men like him, not women like us. He's counting on no one being willing to stand against him on behalf of 3 Indian girls, as he calls us." Nate set aside the deed and picked up the smaller journal. Unlike the one he'd read earlier, this one was newer, its leather cover less worn by time and handling. He opened it to the first page. "My private thoughts regarding NM and the girls, not to be shared until after my death, and then only if necessary. HB." The entries were sporadic, spanning the past 5 years. Many detailed Harrison's attempts to locate Nate, his concerns about the path his friend had chosen, his hopes for eventual reconciliation. Others focused on the sisters, their progress, their healing, their growth into young women of strength and character. One entry, dated 2 years earlier, caught Nate's attention. "Ethan Prescott came by the ranch today, ostensibly to discuss water rights for his father's nearby property. His true purpose was transparent. He couldn't keep his eyes off Luna. There is something disturbing in that young man's gaze, something that makes me fear for her safety when I'm gone. I have taught the girls to shoot to defend themselves, but it may not be enough against the power of the Prescott family. They need a protector, someone whose reputation alone might give men like Ethan pause. I think again of Nathaniel. The stories that reach me speak of a man feared throughout the territory, the sharpshooter from Tennessee. They call him now a killer for hire, some say, though I know there must be more to it than that. The Nate I knew could never become purely that. Perhaps his fearsome reputation could serve a nobler purpose. Perhaps in protecting these girls, he might find his way back to the man I once knew, the man Margaret loved." Another entry from just a month before Harrison's death, Judge Prescott made his offer today, $5,000 for the ranch, a generous sum by any measure. When I declined, the facade of civility dropped away like a mask. "Those Apache girls will be gone the moment you're in the ground," he said. one way or another. I've accelerated my plans. The deed is registered in the girls' names now with all legal formalities observed. I've written to Nathaniel again, though I fear the letter may never reach him. As a final precaution, I've spoken with Martha about making arrangements with Sergeant Winters, who now runs the trading post in El Paso. Winters served with Nathaniel briefly and owes me a favor. If all else fails, he might help. Time grows short. I can feel it in my bones in the way Martha looks at me when she thinks I don't notice. I pray Nathaniel comes in time. I pray he becomes the man these girls need, the man I believe he still can be beneath the years of pain and wandering. Nate closed the journal, a heaviness settling in his chest. Harrison had seen this moment coming, had tried to prepare for it from beyond the grave, had tried to save not just the 3 Apache sisters, but Nate himself. Harrison was a good man, Luna said, breaking the silence. Better than most. Yes, Nate agreed quietly. He was. Do you understand now why he brought you here, why he wanted you to know about your father? Nate looked up at her, seeing not just the woman she was, but the frightened 14-year-old girl she had been torn from her home, her parents murdered before her eyes, sold like property at the hands of Samuel McAllister. He wanted me to make amends, Nate said, for what my father did. No, Luna shook her head. He wanted you to find purpose again. The amends are secondary, important, but secondary. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkness that had fallen over the ranch. Harrison saw something in you worth saving, Nathaniel McAllister. Something beyond the killer you've become. He believed that in saving us, you might save yourself. Nate didn't respond immediately. The weight of Harrison's expectations of his father's sins, of these women's need for protection, it all pressed down on him like a physical burden. Could he be what they needed? Could he find his way back to being the man Margaret had loved, the man who had once dreamed of building a home rather than destroying them? Judge Prescott will come, Luna said, turning back to face him. And he won't come alone. Whatever you decide, we need to be ready. Nate nodded, decision crystallizing within him. We'll be ready. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the Texas spring, offering a brief respite from the heat that would come with summer. Nate rose early, his shoulder less painful thanks to Ayasha's ministrations. He found Luna already awake, cleaning her rifle on the porch. Couldn't sleep, he asked, settling into the chair beside her. See, sleep is a luxury in times like these, she replied, not looking up from her task. What's your assessment of our situation? Direct as always. Nate appreciated that about her. Difficult but not hopeless, he said honestly. The ranch is defensible and you 3 know how to handle yourselves. But Prescott has numbers and the law on his side, or at least the appearance of law. And you, where do you stand? Nate had spent much of the night considering that very question. The revelations about his father, the truth of Harrison's intentions, the responsibility now laid at his feet, it was more than he'd bargained for when he'd followed the trail to this ranch. I'm staying, he said simply, at least until this business with Prescott is settled. Luna nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. And after the future had been a concept Nate had avoided for 7 years, living day-to-day, job to job, with no thought beyond the next horizon. The idea of after was foreign, almost uncomfortable. Let's survive the now first, he deflected. Luna accepted this with another nod, returning to her rifle. They sat in companionable silence as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the yard. The quiet was broken by the sound of a horse approaching a single rider coming fast up the trail. Luna was on her feet in an instant, rifle raised. Nate stood beside her, hand on his revolver. The rider came into view, a young Mexican man on a lathered horse pushing the animal hard. He reined in sharply at the sight of the armed figures on the porch. I bring news, he called, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. From town. Luna lowered her rifle slightly. Speak it then. Judge Prescott, the young man said, his breath coming fast. He is gathering men, many men. They talk of coming here tomorrow, not in 3 days as promised. How many? Nate asked. 20, perhaps more. They are offering good money. Nate exchanged a glance with Luna. 20 armed men was more than they could hope to hold off with just the 4 of them, no matter how defensible the property. Who sent you to warn us? Luna asked, suspicion evident in her tone. The young man, barely more than a boy, really straightened in his saddle. My father works at the livery. He heard them talking. He sent me because... He hesitated, then continued with quiet dignity. Because Senor Blackburn saved my sister last winter when the fever came. We owe him. Luna's expression softened slightly. Thank you for the risk you've taken. Ride back carefully. Don't let them see you've been here. The young man nodded, turned his horse, and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Tomorrow, Luna said quietly, not 3 days. We need to prepare, Nate replied, and we need a plan that doesn't involve shooting it out with 20 hired guns. They went inside to find Ayesha and Kimmy already awake and working, Ayesha grinding herbs with focused intensity, Kimmy cleaning her own rifle with methodical care. Trouble, Ayesha asked, noting their expressions. Prescott's coming tomorrow with 20 men, Luna informed them. We need to be ready to leave. Kimmy's head snapped up. Leave, this is our home, and we can't defend it against those odds, Luna countered. Not directly. Nate watched the exchange, seeing the determination in all three women to protect what was theirs, what Harrison and Martha had given them. He thought of the cave system Kimmy had shown him the day before the hidden spring, the natural features of the land that might give them an advantage. We don't leave, he said, decision made. We make a stand, but on our terms, not theirs. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him, hope and skepticism mingled in their gazes. How? Luna challenged. Even you can't shoot 20 men before they overwhelm us. No, Nate agreed, but I don't have to. A plan was forming in his mind, risky, but with a chance of success.